Hello and welcome to this Housing Ombudsman Centre for Learning podcast, where we'll be talking about our latest Spotlight report on repairs and maintenance, repairing trust. My name's Anthea Chilton and I'm one of the sector learning and development leads here at the Housing Ombudsman Service. So this podcast is going to be split into three parts, and in today's episode we're joined by Zoe Miller, who's our Insight and Systemic Manager at the Housing Ombudsman Service. Zoe wrote the report alongside our colleague Chris Harrison, and today we're going to explore the findings relating to no access, why this happens and what can be done to fix it. So hello Zoe, and thank you for joining me. Hello, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. So as you say, I'm one of our Insight and Systemic Managers working in our Insight and Development team. And we produce, among other things, we produce our Spotlight reports. So I'm the lead author for Repairing Trust, and that includes, I led on the section on no access.
Brilliant, thank you very much. We've seen that no access to homes is a huge challenge in social housing. And our call for evidence for the Spotlight report on repairs and maintenance showed us that 4 out of 5 respondents rated their providers as poor or as very poor at keeping them informed about the progress of repair and maintenance requests. And almost half of the residents that we spoke to rated providers as very poor at keeping them informed about the changes to appointments as well. And many of the respondents referred to missed appointments and multiple visits to the property without solving the problem, and that they often had to persistently chase landlords to get those repairs resolved. We saw that another key issue with no access is the barrier that it can create to carrying out gas safety checks. Not only are gas safety checks a key part of keeping residents safe, there are also risks to non-compliance with the law and to regulation. And we know this comes with huge financial costs too. In the report, we read that the Association of Safety and Compliance Professionals, ASCP, the white paper, Gaining Access for Safety Checks in Social Housing, 2024, estimates that no access missed appointments for gas checks costs the sector between 49 and 65 million every year. So can you tell us why you focused on repairs and maintenance for this Spotlight report?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, so much has changed since our 2019 Spotlight on repairs and maintenance. We've been through a pandemic and there's been many regulatory and legislative changes, such as the advent of Awaab's law. Secondly, it remains a dominant theme in our casework. And we say in the report about a 474% increase in repairs and maintenance investigations between 2019, 2020 and 2024 to 2025, with repairs and maintenance accounting for 45% of complaints in 24-25 and 43% of those being assessed by us as high-risk cases. We set out other key data in the full report, so I won't list them all here, but that gives you a flavour of why we chose repairs and maintenance for this spotlight. And lastly, we acknowledge in the report that 8.8 billion was spent on repairs and maintenance in 2023 and 2024, which is 60% more than in 2019. But despite this increase, many issues remain. So our report looks at why this might be the case. For example, we explore issues surrounding attitudes and approach, which are more mindset changes than financial ones.
So it's really clear that there's been a lot of change in the last 6 years or so, and as you say, we're seeing lots more serious complaints now. So how did you gather the evidence for this report, and who did you work with?
It was really important to us that we captured the perspective of all three parties. So by that, we mean the landlord, contractor or operative, and resident. And so therefore, our approach to this report was a bit different, but I'll start briefly with the parts of our approach that were in keeping with our other spotlights. So with all our spotlight reports, we issue what we call a call for evidence. And this is a set of targeted questions and is effectively a perception survey. And our call for evidence for repairing trust was open to residents, landlords, contractors and operatives. And for the first time, we also opened it up to elected representatives. And this was in recognition of the fact that we are often contacted by MPs or councillors about repairs and maintenance issues faced by their constituents. And we had a record number of responses to this call for evidence, so nearly 4,000 responses, which was fantastic. And the other core aspect of this report and spotlights in general is a review of our casework. We looked at over 300 cases for repairing trust, focusing on the themes in the findings. And it's important to stress here that when we do our casework review, we're looking for positive examples and no maladministration examples as much as where things have gone wrong. And that's because the spotlight reports are about highlighting learning and good practice. And I can assure you, we all get really rather excited in the team working on it when we find a positive example of no maladministration that we can use in the report. Moving on to repairing trust more specifically, it's the most collaborative spotlight we've produced to date. We spoke with Chartered Institute of Housing, National Housing Federation, TPAS, the Law Society, Efficiency North, and the Association of Safety Professionals that you mentioned, and that's not an exhaustive list. We held roundtable events with contractors and procurement agencies, which were very well attended. We're incredibly grateful to those who contributed. And a lot of the contractor perspective in the report came from those sessions. We also carried out fieldwork for this report, which involved in-person visits to landlords to meet with them and their repairs and maintenance teams. We wanted to ensure that we had a geographical spread, so we met with landlords based in Newcastle all the way down to Cornwall. And as if that wasn't enough, we also worked with the University of Birmingham, so Dr. Hannah Absalom to be precise, and we drew upon her home encounters research, particularly in relation to the section in the spotlight about no access.
You're not on your own there as well, because we in the Centre for Learning we get really excited when we hear about positive cases too, Zoe. But bringing together all of the insights from residents, landlords, contractors, and such a wide range of other organisations, as you mentioned, is a really collaborative and an inclusive approach. And almost 4,000 responses to the call for evidence is amazing. It highlights just how engaged people are when it comes to the topic of no access, and it shows how important it is to them. And one part of the report that stands out is that issue of no access, and how a home is more than just a physical space. It's a sanctuary where people find safety, comfort, and a sense of identity. So what did you find when you were exploring this?
Yeah, so the home encounters research, and particularly the framing of home as an emotional place, was so fitting when we explored this theme of no access. It really helped us break down access issues into what we describe as the practical and the emotional reasons sitting behind it, and urge landlords to look at both. By practical, we mean issues such as residents not receiving any reminders or indeed notification of an appointment, so the resident isn't at home to grant access, or turning the operative away because it isn't convenient. Other practical issues from our investigation included operatives not being given job IDs or photo ID, again meaning a resident refuses entry. And I have to say that parking permits featured very heavily from the contractor perspective as a practical reason why they're not able to fulfill an appointment. And the emotional aspects that we touch on include a fear of judgment, that sense of intrusion into one's sanctuary and personal private space, particularly intimate areas such as bathrooms and bedrooms, and perhaps a sense of shame or embarrassment about the residents' living conditions. Other emotional aspects include a lack of trust regarding the purpose of the visit. If someone is in arrears, for instance, and an operative comes to do a repair, the resident may feel the two are linked, and the operative will then start discussing the arrears with them, therefore creating a sense of unease and distrust and anxiety. And there can also be concerns about financial costs the residents may incur as part of the appointment, such as heating costs if the heating needs to be turned on.
It's really interesting to hear how access issues aren't just about missed appointments, which might be sort of the first thing that comes to mind when you think about it. There are all those practical things, and how even those small details, like you say, the parking permits can have such an impact. But also that emotional side, it really highlights how personal and sensitive these situations can be. So with that in mind, what can landlords do to ensure that they respond with empathy?
That's a really important question, and I'm pleased to say that we did see some examples of empathic responses in relation to access, so I'll draw upon some of those. I mentioned the concerns about heating costs earlier, so we found that some landlords are offering heating vouchers as a matter of course alongside that appointment, And what's particularly heartening with this is that it isn't something the resident has to request, which really encapsulates the landlord's sensitivity of approach. We found other positive examples of landlords really exploring some of those underlying reasons why access is proving to be problematic. And this often involves taking it right back to the foundations of the relationship and asking, is trust there? And if not, landlords are taking steps to address this, such as providing reassurance of the purpose of the visits, trying to reduce the number of visits needed by combining repairs and maintenance with things such as annual safety checks, and also using campaigns to raise awareness of the importance of these checks. Our report has case studies from our casework regarding access being approached in this sensitive, responsive and human-centric way. And the home encounters research I mentioned provides some useful pointers as well regarding responding with empathy, such as co-designing property inspections with residents, offering alternatives to home visits where practical, respecting personal boundaries and providing social and emotional training for staff. And also the Stop Social Housing Stigma campaign also encourages landlords to involve residents in monitoring repair services and acting on any behaviours which may stigmatise vulnerable residents. So this includes issues relating to vulnerability, accessibility, language barriers and other additional needs, cold calling, which we'll come on to, and subsequent claims of no access.
It's so encouraging to hear those examples of good practice, especially when landlords take those proactive steps, like offering those heating vouchers and co-designing property inspections. And as we've already said, we always like to highlight where things are working well. And I think particularly in this instance, it shows what's possible when empathy is built into that process. But what we do know is access isn't always easy. So what did contractors and landlords tell you about the challenges they face when they can't get into a resident's home?
The vast majority of landlords and contractors want to be able to fulfil the repair or maintenance job or safety check, and it causes a lot of concern when they're unable to do so, particularly around legal obligations. Our December 2024 Learning from Severe Maladministration report highlights the link between incomplete repairs and maintenance jobs and access, and how landlords are ultimately responsible for these. So again, highlighting that landlords do want to get this right because they're aware of their obligations. I mentioned the parking permits and lack of job IDs earlier and how they can be the difference between a successful or unsuccessful appointment. Well, that frustrates the contractor as much as it frustrates the resident. We heard a lot from contractors about driving around and around and not being able to park near the property, so having to give up. Contractors and landlords both spoke of some of the access challenges posed when there's a legal disrepair claim. So one contractor said to us, they described it as the claim takes on a life of its own. We've previously produced guidance on disrepair claims and also set out our position in our damp and mould follow-up report. So we're acutely aware of the issues faced in this regard, and we did meet with the Law Society about this very issue as part of our research. There's a landlord challenge example which has stuck with me. So one of the landlords we met with as part of our fieldwork told us access issues were particularly prevalent during sunny weather. And they're a coastal landlord. And they said that operatives have been ringing residents to ask where they are because they have an appointment and the operative can't get in. And they've noticed this increase of residents saying, well, it's a nice day and I've gone to the beach. But rather than simply recording this as no access and putting the onus on the resident, the landlord reflected and said it's realised this attitude has developed because residents had waited in so many times for an operative or contractor who'd never showed. And it meant that the resident felt that the appointment and their time wasn't valued. And that it then engendered this response where residents, as a result, do not value the operatives or landlord's time. And the landlord is treating this problem as an exercise in rebuilding trust.
That's such a good point that really demonstrates how access issues can be just as frustrating for landlords and contractors, or for contractors as they are for residents, and how complex the situation can become, especially when the legal claims or trust issues are involved as well. And I think the example that you shared from the coastal landlord illustrates how past experiences can really shape those current behaviours, and that's for both sides. Are there any case studies or examples in the report that particularly show how access issues can impact residents?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the difficulty was more deciding which ones to use in the report because we had so many, but we haven't wasted any though, because you and the team in Centre for Learning are going to convert some of the surplus ones into learning materials. So that's great.
Yes.
Um, but we have an example of a distressing forced entry for a resident because the landlord had incorrectly recorded it as and treated it as no access, despite the fact the resident had rearranged the previous appointment and it was missed because the contractor didn't show up. And I said we'd come to cold calling earlier. So there is an example in the report of a resident who kept being cold called in terms of the contractor turning up unannounced, and the resident hadn't allowed entry. And in that case, the landlord treated these as no access without considering why the resident would simultaneously keep chasing the repairs and asking for them to be sorted, whilst then seemingly not granting access. And it was only after our intervention the landlord scrutinised the no access appointments and accepted there'd been a communication issue. So the impact of this was compounded by the fact the resident had sight, breathing and mobility issues and was living in damp and mould. That every time the missed appointment was incorrectly treated as a choice by the resident, that became another day she was living in conditions which were detrimental to her health.
I think those examples really underline just how serious the impact of access issues can be, and especially when communication breaks down or when assumptions are made. And yeah, absolutely. We in the Centre for Learning are beavering away, and we're creating e-learning and other resources too. So those additional case studies that you mentioned won't be going to waste. So watch this space. And that brings us to recommendation 6 in the report, which talks about the importance of leveraging insights for service improvements and using those insights gained from data analysis to make meaningful changes. How can landlords and contractors put these insights into action, and what kind of positive changes could residents expect to see as a result?
Yeah, so we've touched on some elements of this. So the example of the landlord who scrutinised its own missed appointments and realised this was now being reflected in residents' approach to appointments. It also incorporates the earlier point around that curiosity and desire to understand what sits behind no access, particularly when there's a series of no access appointments. And if a resident is chasing a repair whilst also denying access, there's clearly a disconnect there, and it should be explored. Positive changes for residents could include that more inquisitorial approach rather than what can become a combative exchange about who is to blame for the no access. And part of this approach includes identifying and then seeking to remove barriers to granting access, whether they are those practical or emotional reasons, as we discussed. We spoke of a human-centric approach in our previous Spotlight report on attitudes, rights and respect, and there are definite parallels between that and the key messages from this report.
Well, that was my last question for you, and I think that's such a valuable point to end on, sort of shifting from a blame-focused approach to one that's more curious and human-centred. That really does have the potential to change the outcomes for residents. And as you've mentioned, it's about understanding the why behind the behaviour, not just sort of the behaviour itself and taking it for that, but sort of exploring the reasons behind it. But Zoe, thank you so much for joining us and
You're welcome.
sharing your. It's lovely to have you, and thank you for sharing your insights into the issue of no access. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning, we'll be continuing with part 2 of this podcast series on repairing trust with our brilliant colleague Chris Harrison. He's Insight and Systemic Lead, and Chris will be joining us to explore the next theme, and we'll be focusing on behaviours, trust and codes of conduct. So please do stay tuned for that. Thanks again, Zoe, and thank you to everyone for listening.